back a little bit to Anchot Beis on the base to Rabbi Yosha. Rabbi Yosha, which is at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down in the Gemara. There's a dot there. Yeah, Rabbi Yosha Amar. Okay. Rabbi Yosha Amar Liyatzei Mitzrayim Nischal Koretz. Rabbi Yosha said there's a three-way machlokas here, which we're beginning at the beginning of as opposed to the middle of. Rabbi Yosha Amar Liyatzei Mitzrayim Nischal Koretz. Eretz Yisrael was divided up to the people who entered the land of Israel. Okay, without reference to the people who left Egypt. As they entered, that's how they divided up. As many people as entered, over 20, they got portions. Okay, the Chesed says Lishmos Matos Avosov. This is I'm sorry, Yotzi Mitzrayim. Sorry, to those who left Egypt without any reference to those who entered the land. Scratch that. The opposite of what I just said before. In other words, even though the people who left Egypt were no longer alive, nevertheless, Eretz Yisrael was divided up to them because it was the land promised unto them. Okay? So Shmos Matos Avosov, to the names of the tribes of their fathers. Okay, Matam Lomer Leila. So why does it say Leila Techolek Eretz, the ones who entered Eretz Yisrael? It's not true, right? It's going to tell us, just like Eila, the ones in front of us today, preclude women and children, so too the ones who left Mitzrayim means the ones who are over 20 and male at the time they left Mitzrayim. But the portions are divided up strictly according to the people who left Mitzrayim. Okay, that's important. That's opinion number 1. Rabbi Yochanan, that's opinion number 2. We're doing a Ephraim, so it should be Rabbi Yochanan. That doesn't not so germane what the name is for our purposes. The exact opposite, right? It goes according to those lands in the land of Israel. So why Taka does it make reference to those who left Egypt? So here already Rabbi Yochanan makes kind of a compromise. He says, this is different than all other inheritances in the world. Any portion, any inheritance you have in the world, Chaim Yoshim Mason, those who are alive inherit those who are dead. Mason Yoshim Chaim. Here, though, those who are dead inherited those who are alive. Now, what that means is, if you had from 2 families, a grand total of 2 families, one family had 10 children, and the other family had 1 child, and they were cousins. In other words, the fathers are brothers, and there are 11 children, 10 of one and 1 of the other. Okay? Is that clear? You have 2 brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven had 10 sons, Shimon had 1 son. Okay. Now, theoretically, if you divide up according to Reuven and Shimon left Egypt, their 11 children entered the land of Israel. If you went strictly according to Rabbi Yoshia, the first opinion, then Reuven would get 1 portion, Shimon would get 1 portion, right? That's it. 2 portions here, right? If you went strictly according to Boyaretz, you'd have 11 portions here, right? Right. So what is Rabbi Yochanan says is that you make kind of a compromise. You give 11 portions, but then you go back to the first to the Yotzei Mitzrayim, and you divide up those 11 portions equally among Reuven and Shimon, which means instead of 10 and 1, it's going to be 5.5 and 5.5, and then you give the 10 kids of Reuven the 5.5 portions, and the 1 kid of Shimon the 5.5 portions. You see how that works? Okay, again, one more time. Reuven and Shimon were the Yotzei Mitzrayim. Okay? 2 brothers. They had between them 11 children. Reuven had 10 and Shimon had 1. Okay? All boys, of course. Now, if we went totally according to Yotzei Mitzrayim, there should be only 2 portions here. 1 and Shimon get the other. And Reuven's 10 kids would divide up the 1 portion, and Shimon's 1 kid would get his 1 portion. That's when we went strictly according to Yotzei Mitzrayim. If we went strictly according to Nichnosim La'aretz, those who entered the land of Israel, then actually would there be 11 portions here? 10 portions for Reuven's 10 kids and 1 portion for Shimon's 1 kid, right? That would be if we went strictly according to Boi Ha'aretz. That would be 11. What did I say? Yes, 11. Yes. Okay, now, so what do we do? In fact, what we do is, according to Rabbi Yochanan, we do neither of these things. We combine the two generations. We first look at how many people enter the land of Israel. Okay, and among Reuben and Shimon's 2 families, that's 11 people, right? So we give 11 portions. But we don't give them to those 11 children per 1 portion per person. Rather, we take those portions, and the dead people inherit the live people. Meaning that Reuven and Shimon, who are no longer alive, in some hypothetical way, inherit their children. Meaning that those 11 portions go back to the parents, to Reuven and Shimon. Now, if you take those 11 portions and give them back to the dead Reuven and Shimon, how much is each one of those guys going to get? Mix them, combine the 2 portions and distribute them equally between the 2 brothers. Each one will get how much? 5.5. So therefore now give it back to the Nichnasim La'aretz. How much? The 10 kids of Reuven will divide up how many portions among themselves? 5.5. And the 1 kid of Shimon will get 5.5. That's what Rabbi Yochanan holds. Okay? So it's not fair in any sense we would call fair. Okay? In the great American concept of fairness, something is lacking. Yeah, that sure is fair. So in any event, but that's how Rabbi Yochanan holds it. And that, in fact, is the sheet that Rashi brings down on Chumash. Tani, Rabbi Yerushalmi Bava Basra has yet another shita. Okay, so far we had Liyatim Mitzrayim. We had the Boya Oretz, but with a catch that you go back to the previous generation then and redistribute. Yerushalmi Bava Basra has another shot. He says Liyatim Mitzrayim Ula Eindim Barba Smov Nischal Oretz. Ketzad. How does this work? In other words, you both, the people who left Egypt and the people standing out of Moab in the plains of Moab, poised to enter the land of Israel, received. Now, let's ignore the Gemara's example for a minute. Let's go according to our example. In that case, in the case of Reuven and Shimon, Reuven had 10 kids and Shimon had 1 kid. So how many portions? If you gave according to both generations, then actually you would come out with 13 portions. Do you see that? 10. Right. That's how he holds. Give these 2 families together 13 portions. So actually, what would come out would be that instead of 5.5, each branch of time would get what? 6.5, right? So that's the difference between him and Rabbi Yochanan. Okay? Now let's say you were lucky enough to be one of the people who left Egypt and be standing in Arvos Moab, either by some nace you didn't die, or as the Pnei Moshe brings down, you were over 60 when you left Egypt, which means now you were the ripe old age of 100, about to enter the land of Israel, because the Gzeir was not on those who were over 60 at the time of the Chet HaMeraglim, right? So actually we're 99 now. So in any event, because it was in the second year of the Chet HaMeraglim. So now you get 2 portions. One as a Yetzim Mitzrayim, and one as a Nichnas La'aretz. You personally. Okay? So, Misha Yetzim Mitzrayim Miyodim Arvas Moab, Noter Shnei Chalokim. Miyotzim Mitzrayim Belom Miyodim Arvas Moab. If you would be from those who left Egypt and not from Arvas Moab, Miyodim Arvas Moab Belom Miyotzim Mitzrayim. If you were from either one of those generations, not a chelik echad, you only get 1 portion. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think my 6.5 shot is not correct. In other words, it wasn't redistributed, right? It was not like Rabbi Yochanan. No, it depends where. If you were lucky enough to be per person who left Egypt, then and was standing there, you got 2. If you entered Eretz Yisrael now, you got 1. If you left Egypt, right, then you got 1. and that one would be distributed among your kids. So let's see how that would work. Okay, now that I've reneged on my shot from before, let's take the case Reuven and Shimon and the 10 kids and the 1 kid. Okay, so Reuven and Shimon left Egypt. Each one, and they're dead. Each one they gets 1 portion, right? Reuven's kids get 10 portions. Shimon's kid gets 1 portion. Now, actually, what's going to happen is that Reuven's kids, all 10 of his kids, are actually going to end up with 1.1 portions apiece. Do you see that? Because Reuven, there's no mixing and matching here. Reuven got a portion. His 10 kids each got a portion. So Reuven's 1 portion, assuming none of them was Bechor, let's say a girl was born first, right? So Reuven's 10 boys would divide up his 1 portion equally among them. His portion is the Yotzei Mitzrayim. So therefore, each of Reuven's kids will get their 1 portion as Nichnasim La'aretz, plus 10% of their father's portion. So they would each end up with 1.1 portions. Shimon's 1 kid would have his own 1 portion, plus Shimon's portion. So he because Shimon left Egypt, and Shimon's kid, entered Eretz Yisrael. So he would end up with 2 portions. Did you follow that? What? Okay. So that's actually Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha's shita. Okay, now B'nos Tzlofchad, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, Natul Chamish Chalokim. They got 5 portions. How so? Chelkonim Yotzei Mitzrayim. First of all, their father left Egypt. Tzlofchad, they left Egypt. That's 1. Their Chelkonim Yotzei Mitzrayim. Even though there are 5 girls, but 5 girls count as 1 boy, so therefore they have 1 portion as Nichnasim La'aretz, right? As people as if they were a boy entering Eretz Yisrael. That's 2 portions, right? So far. And also Shea Bechor, Tzlofchad was firstborn. So therefore, they got as since he was a firstborn. So therefore, that was Shnei Chalokim. They actually got 2 portions. Now, there's a little bit of a sleight of hand here. I'm not sure exactly how this works because L'chaira, one of his portions should have been the initial portion he got as a Yotzei Mitzrayim. But I guess that what it means is that their grandfather also left Egypt. In other words, Tzlofchad wasn't the only one to leave Egypt, but their grandfather left Egypt too. So therefore, you know what, and that's really the next line in the Gemara. If you take a look at the next line, it says, V'chelik avian b'soch achi avian, their father's portion among his brothers as well. So, in other words, the assumption is that Tzlofchad's father left Egypt. Tzlofchad did as well. He didn't enter Eretz Yisrael. His kids entered Eretz Yisrael's 5 daughters. So altogether, there are 5 portions here. The 5 portions are 1, the kids' portion themselves, because they entered Eretz Yisrael. 2, Tzlofchad's portions because he left Mitzrayim. 3, the Tzlofchad's 2 portions in his grandfather's portion, because his grandfather also left Mitzrayim. Tzlofchad's father's portion, which is the B'nos Tzlofchad's grandfather, because his father also left Egypt. So as a Bechor, he got double in that. That's another 2 portions. And besides that, somehow, I don't know exactly how this works, but somehow the grandfather's portion itself is considered to be yet another portion given to B'nos Tzlofchad. Now, I don't know exactly how that works because something seems to be redundant there. It seems to be a little bit funny. But the bottom line is that they got from several generations, maybe the portions we're talking about are not equal portions. I'm not sure exactly how it works out to be totally 5. Anyway, be that as it may, let's not get hung up on that. Somehow they got 5 portions again because their grandfather left Egypt and their father left Egypt. Amar Rabbi Yossi Masnisal Amar, okay? Our Mishnah doesn't say that. It says that you give the children, you give the B'nos Tzlofchad their portion among their father's brothers. Okay, so you really can't understand what the Gemara is talking about without looking at Pnei Moshe. The Pnei Moshe says is that they only had 3 portions. In other words, their portion, their father's portion, the portion of the father's portion, and his portion as a Bechor, and their portion in. Still say I'll get 3. Those are your three. Our Mishnah said, the Mishnah at the top of the page says, Chelak Avim Shiyotza Mitzrayim. Oh, okay, yeah. So the Mishnah says it. But take a look back at the Mishnah, top of the page. Their father's portion left Egypt, and his portion with his brothers in Chefer. It was Slavchon ben Chefer. That's the grandfather's name, Chefer. Besides, it was a Bechor, he got two portions. So our Mishnah is actually very straightforward, because our Mishnah explains quite clearly how there are three portions. Because Slavchon got one portion because he was Yotzei Mitzrayim. Chefer, who was Slavchod's father, was also Yotzei Mitzrayim, so he gets a portion, right? And besides, so in Chefer's portion, Slavchod gets two portions. Why? Because Slavchod was a Bechor. Now here you see quite clearly, I know I'm confusing you, and I apologize for that. But here you see quite clearly that the portions we're discussing, when we say Slavchod got three portions, they're not equal portions. It means there were three reasons why he was allotted land. He was allotted land, one, because he was Slavchod himself left Egypt. Two, because he got double portion in Chefer. But Chefer's portion himself was divided up among all of Chefer's sons. And Chefer's portion was equivalent as a Yotzei Mitzrayim to Slavchod's portion. So therefore, when we say that Slavchod got three portions, we're not talking about three equally significant portions. He had his own portion, which was super significant, which was of regular significance, and then he had a double partial portion in Chefer, his father's portion, as the Bechor inheriting and getting a double portion over his brothers. Did anybody follow what I just said? Oh, okay, good. All right. So it's hard to tell when you don't look at people's faces. So in any event, so be that as it may, that's all assuming that that there was no. See, our Mishnah assumes that there was no portion distributed to the Bnei Slavchon as Nichnasim La'aretz. Everything goes back to Slavchon and Chefer because they left Mitzrayim. We do not give any credence to the parameter of entering Eretz Yisrael. So our Mishnah seems not to indicate like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. However, immediately the Gemara ignores our Mishnah and continues along the vein of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, who takes both elements into account, as you shall see presently. But not yet. Without getting into the pasuk in Yehoshua, it works out that there were 10 portions, including the three portions of Bnei Slavchon. 6 for the six tribes of the other tribes which entered Eretz Yisrael from Shevet Menashe, and which was Chatzi Shevet Menashe, of course. And then there was Bnei Slavchon, who were 3, and there was one other portion from the grandfather of Chefer. Be that as it may, we're not going to get into it right now. Lamaisa, the Gemara says it works out with that, with the 10 works out with Bnei Slavchon getting 3. Now, again, as I said, we go back to Yerushalmi ben Karcha's position, however, as you'll see presently. Yoshua v'Kalev natu shlosh chalakim. Yoshua and Kalev got 3 portions. What were the 3? One second, the oven is open. Okay. Yoshua and Kalev got 3 portions. Chelko im Yotzei Mitzrayim. His each one got 3 portions. Chelko im Yotzei Mitzrayim. First of all, they left Egypt. Chelko im Yotzei Mitzrayim. You see, we went back to Bishop Karcha. They got an additional portion because they were standing Arvas Moab. Besides that, they got a special gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They got the portion of the other Meraglim. They were sustained from those people. What does it mean? They were sustained from those people who visited the land of Israel. They got their portion. However, the portions which should have gone to those people who were consumed by plague when they complained in the desert, and that's correct, the portion which would have gone to Korach's group, Nafal, and so that was dispersed equally among the Shvatim. In other words, there was nobody else got that in lieu of Bnei Korach. Okay? Upneihem, hi, wait a minute, the sons of Korach we know survived, right? Upneihem, b'schus aviyaviyem v'imoseim. Their children, the Korach's kids, or whoever else's kids in that group survived, only got in the schus of their grandfathers, which I guess left Egypt as well. Their grandfathers on the father's side, the grandsons on the mother's side. They'll see how it says of Bnei Korach Lamesu, they did not die, but their portions they only got based on their grandparents. Now, of course, if we go like Shimon Korach, they also got on their own merit because they entered the land of Israel. But if you go on the assumption that only Yotzei Mitzrayim got, which was the opinion of to Rabbi Yoshua, then they only got on the merit of whatever grandparents they had who left Egypt. Okay? Rebbe, Moshlo Ma'adover Doima. Rebbe gave an analogy to what are this. Yes. That's a good point. I guess Bnei Korach themselves lav dafka. Either that or their portion in the Orei Halavim. But that's a good point. You're right. Maybe the other people like Bnei Korach who didn't die. That's a good question. I didn't even think of that. Yeshkoyach. What? Yeah. Takes a Levi to think of that question. Okay, Rebbe Moshe Ma'adover Doima. Was this analogous to L'shnei Achim Shutim, two brothers who are partners? Sheyotzu b'Mitzrayim. And they left Egypt. L'zeh Tisha Banim. Okay, this is very similar to the case I gave you before. You have two brothers who left Egypt. L'zeh Reuven and Shimon. L'zeh Tisha Banim u'l'zeh Ben Echad. One of them has 9 sons, and the other has 1 son. Right? The Yorshu base, it should be Chamisha. Almost everybody changed it. 5 Kurim. They inherited 5 Kur. Kol echad ve'echad noitel lesech. Each one gets a lesech, which is a half a kur. Okay, there are 10 boys, so each one gets half a kur. But then we're going with Rabbi Yochanan Shita. You could give it back to the fathers, right? V'cholkom, and they split it up. So nimtza gzeh noitel mechza ben zeh noitel mechza. The one son of Shimon gets half, gets 5. Bnei zeh, the 9 sons of Reuven, they nogli mechza, they get half. In other words, instead of my 5.5, you have the same thing here with 5, the same idea. Rabbi Tzloi ben Yudai Moshe gave a different analogy. There were 2 brothers, Kohanim, who were partners. Again, Reuben and Shimon. The dividing of Trumas and Maya Trumas in somebody's silo. One had 9 sons and one had 1 son. And they took Trumos, which are 10 kav. I don't know why we'd have to give this mashal, but we do. They give it to their fathers. The Chochim, they divided up. Even though one had 9 sons and one had 1 son, Nimtza Zeh ben Zeh Noite Mechta, Bnei Zeh Mechta, the sons of each one get half. Okay, the same idea. Rabbi Yochanan Mason, top of Chav Gimarav. Rabbi Yochanan asked a question. It says, actually the pasuk is not, the pasuk is cited by Gemara, but at the bottom of the Gemara you have the Shnui and the Schos. And there brings down the proper language of pasuk. I'll bring them to the land which I lifted up my hand. And I'll give it to you a morasha. The land of Israel is a morasha, which literally means inheritance. We're going to dash it here. It's in the etc. Now the kasha is imatona. This actually ties into the rest to other parts of the Yesh Narakum, which we're going to Mir Hashem get to tonight. Imatona lam Yerusha. If it's a gift, why is it called an inheritance? The Yerushalmi Bava, it says in the same pasuk, the other one it says Morasha. Is it a gift or is it an inheritance? So says the Gemara, once it's given to him as a gift, then Yerusha was given, then it becomes an inheritance as well. In other words, it was not initially a birthright in the land of Israel, but it became a birthright. Now there's a whole passage in the Escorial, which is not here, which I'm just going to read to you, even though of course you don't have it in front of you. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Miriam, the Shem Rabbi Yochanan, says, "Kasuv, it says, "V'tapchem asher amartem lavaziyeh." After the Ma'aseh Meraglim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, "Your children who you said will be for naught, Uvnechem shelo yadu hayom tov hara, and your children who did not know good and evil, Hema Yavo Shama, they will go there to Eretz Yisrael. V'lohem then unto you, to them I shall give it. V'hem Yerushua, and they will inherit it. And the same question there, it says Matana and Yerusha. In Matana lo Yerusha, Udlam Yerusha, v'im Yerusha lo Matana. How can it be? It's either Matana or Yerusha, not both. No, so after it was initially given them as a gift, Chazam Naslam B'Lashon Yerusha was given them as Yerusha subsequently. Rabbi Yoshia, going back to the Gemara which we have in front of us. Rabbi Yoshia says in the fourth line down, anytime it says the word Morasha, Lashon Diha, it's a language of darkness, meaning it's not so simple. Morasha is not the same as Yerusha. Now don't ask me the dikduk, but Morasha is not the same as Yerusha. It's much more difficult and much less likely to actually occur. Hey Sigun, so they asked the obvious question, what about Torah Tzivolonu Moshe Morasha Kilas Yaakov? Isn't that our birthright, our inheritance, right? The Torah says Gemara. Now the line is a little bit better in the Skorial, so I'll read the way it says in the Skorial, but it's more or less the same thing. It says V'is Dios Sagin Mina. You think that is there anything more dark, meaning more schwer, more difficult than Torah? Boyin du loi from hashkachula. A person toils and toils and learns, and he still forgets everything that he learned. So therefore, you see that Torah is takem morasha. People simply are incapable of grasping their Torah. You know, Lieberman brings down the famous medrash about Moshe Rabbeinu. It says by Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went up to Sinai for 40 days, he was loimed mishakech. He learned and forgot, until finally, at the end of the 40 days, the Torah was given to him as a gift. In other words, it's a siyata d'shmaya, then really it's not necessarily in direct correlation to the amount of learning what you do, but rather to the amount of merit that you have, how much of your learning you'll actually remember. Okay? So that's why the language of morasha is used by learning as well. Oh. Oh yeah, he says about Avos Hashem. That's an interesting idea. Where does he say that? Okay, if you ever find that, I'm very interested in seeing it. Okay, shkoyach. Halacha Gimel. Echad ben v'echad bas benachla. A son and daughter, where there is no son, of course, are equivalent in how they inherit. Ella, except Shaben no talpi shnayim b'nichsei av, a son when he inherits gets double in his father's portion, father's property, of course, if he's the bechor. Ve'ena noita b'shnayim nichseim, and not in his mother's property, even if he's the bechor of his mother. There's no bechor by mother's inheritance. And a girl never gets double. Habanas hizonos b'nichsei, and also girls who are sustained by the father's estate are sustained only from the father's estate and given preferential treatment. The boys have to go back. They're not given that preferential treatment when it comes to the mother's property. Okay? It says, by everything which is found by the father, the bechor gets double. Ketzad, how so? Yoresh b'roi k'v'muchsak. The bechor gets double also in things which are not which the father doesn't even have, like outstanding loans which the father hasn't collected yet. Some which the father would eventually have collected, which the son will now collect after his father's death. The bechor gets double in that as well. Now this is in direct contradiction to the Bavli. The Bavli says that a bechor does not get double in roi, only in muchzak. Not in things which are going to come in after the father's death, only what the father is holding on to at the time that the father dies. So since this is direct contradiction to the Bavli, and even to the Yerushalmi, which we will see tomorrow night, so then there's some people who change the girsa here. They change Ketzad Eina Yoresh B'roi Kivim Bulsa. But Lamais, it's very difficult to do that without changing the Gemara dramatically, and both our text and the Skoriel read the same way. So it's more likely that this Yerushalmi is arguing the Bavli. Okay, and so it seems for us from the continuation. Case on Mace Avi B'chai Avi Aviv. A case is of Roy is if your father predeceased your grandfather, right? So the property which is going to come from the grandfather after the grandfather's own death is Roy. It's not. It's coming in. It's not yet held by the father at the time of his death. So whether you the Bechor will get double in that property is contingent on whether we say that Bechor gets double in Roy as in Musak or not. Right? Same idea. So Ketz Meis Avi 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 Noitel Pi Shnai Minichsi Avi, he gets double from his father's property. Vein Noitel Pi Shnai Minichsi Avi Avi. He doesn't get double from his grandfather's property. Now that sounds pretty clearly like the ones who changed the Kirsa and have it that a Bechor does not get in Roy Kibam Buchsak. But immediately the Gemara seems to change it to 2, which is why it makes a problem. If, however, his father was a Bechor, so Kishem Shenata Minichse Aviv, just like he takes from his father's property double, Kach Noito Benichse Avi Aviv, so too he gets from his grandfather's property double. So you see quite clearly here that Gemara says, yes, but there is Roy where he does get double. In other words, he does get the double in the grandfather's property before the father inherits that property. The father is not a Bechor, right? Because at that point there is no double for him to get, right? He's going, when he inherits, with his father predeceases his grandfather, he's actually going to inherit the grandfather directly, not through his father. So therefore, why should he get double? But what the Gemara does say, and in this case, Roy, Bechor, he does get in Roy Kibam Muchsak, that if his father was a Bechor and was slated to get double in the grandfather's property, in that case, even though the father predeceased the grandfather, so that right of Bechor does pass down to the grandson. So even though he's inheriting the grandfather after his father's death, and directly, nevertheless, that right of Bechor, which was Roy, does pass down to him in that case. Okay? It's a very interesting concept. Again, if the father not predeceased the grandfather, even if the father was not a Bechor, so whatever the father got from the grandfather, the grandson will get double. But if the father predeceases the grandfather, and the father is not a Bechor, then in that case, the grandson, who inherits directly from the grandfather, by the principle which the Bavli calls mishmush, although I haven't seen it yet in the Yerushalmi, but which means that you skip generations and go to the next guy down the line. So then Taki, the grandson doesn't get double in the grandfather's property. That Roy he doesn't get. But the Roy he does get is that if his father was a Bechor, and that was something which would have been integral to the line of succession, then that right remains with the son even after his father predeceased his grandfather, which is an interesting chiddush which Yerushalmi has. Okay? Reish Lakish b'shem Rabbi, which the Bavli would not hold of, if I understand correctly. Reish Lakish b'shem Abba bar Daloyan says, Nemar mishpat lina kfela, it says it's a judgment in terms of the double of a Bechor. But Nemar mishpat Pshutin says it's a judgment in terms of the single portion of a non-Bechor. Malidim Pshuta in terms of a simple, straightforward portion, not a Bechor. Atorosa ben kilukayim lito pshito zaviv. You see the son as if he's alive in order to take the one portion of his father, meaning that you see the father of this survivor alive, even though he predeceased the grandfather, to take the grandfather's portion, his portion in the grandfather's property, and then to transmit it down to his son. Afli and Kfela, also in terms of double, Adrosa ben Kilukayim, you see the son alive, Lito Kfela Saviv, in other words, you see it going through the father, even if the father predeceased the grandfather, and therefore he takes double in the grandfather's property, even if his father is not a Bechor. Now this is a very, very complicated issue, and it's really beyond the scope of our discussions to get into it. But it seems that Reish Lakish does not hold of mishmush. Meaning the Reish Lakish holds that property doesn't skip generations. Even if the father predeceases the grandfather, it can't skip the father. It's got to go through the father. So therefore, since that is the case, even if the father predeceased the grandfather, whatever parameters would apply to the inheritance, had it gone into normal fashion from grandfather to father to grandson, apply even if it goes directly from grandfather to grandson. And the machlokas between him and the previous Amora is therefore, does this grandson, who's the bechor of his father, get double in what came down directly from his grandfather to him? If you hold of mishmush, skipping, going over the dead father from grandfather to grandson, then he wouldn't get double because he's not his grandfather's bechor. But if you hold that it must go through the dead father, then even though the father is dead, nevertheless, since in anything from his father, this grandson gets double, so too now, when what he gets from the grandfather, it also gets double as well. Which is a very interesting machlokas, but let's not get into it now. Are you still with me over there? Okay. Halacha Dal. Homer, somebody says, each ploni b'ni bechor, my son who is a bechor, lo yitop ishnayim, should not take towards a double portion. Each ploni b'ni, my son who is my son, lo yirashim achiv, should not inherit with his brethren. Lo maklum. It's not a valid condition. Shehisna pilmasha kosa b'Torah. He made a condition against that which the Torah says to us, right? Which is that there's a constant double portion by Bechor and a single portion by the other son. Nevertheless, if somebody before he dies, as he is dying, with the concept of matna shchiv meira, distributes his property not according to the allocation which the Torah has given, rather according to as he sees fits. And he gives one of his sons too much and one of his sons too little. Hishvalam is Bechor, he gives the Bechor the equivalent portion to the other brothers. Devarav, turn the page, Devav, Kayomi, we sustain his words, why? Because then he's not doing it as Yerusha. It's only Master because if you try to change what the Torah gives as parameters of Yerusha, but that's not what he's doing. What he's doing, rather, is, in fact, giving kinyanim, giving gifts before his death. Gifts before his death, he can do whatever he wants. So that's why a will, in Jewish law, has to be constructed not as what happens post-mortem, but happens pre-mortem. Do you see that? In order to avoid the issue of Master Mashkos B'Torah. Is that clear? Yeah, okay. That may be true as well, but doesn't come up in Bava Basra. So, we said because of, if he tried to change the manner of inheritance, as we said at the beginning of the Mishnah, it's invalid. So if he wrote a document attesting to his redistribution of his wealth among his children, and he wrote the language of gift, either so if anyone in the document, the Gemara is going to give examples. So Mishum Atani wrote the concept of gifting. Dvarav Kayam, it sustains the entire thing, and we look at it as a matan as opposed to trying to change Yerusha. Rabbi Law had a case in which either he himself or a paskin that one could make the Bechor equal to the other brothers. Rabbi Chagai said either to him or to people in the base medrash, isn't it going against the Torah itself, which just says that you can't change the Bechor and give it to somebody else? Says more. Rabbi Lezer says, he took a note that it's possible to do it. It's not proper to do it. Now, Lamaisa, what it means is that you're not supposed to do it. The Gemara in Bavli says that even if you have a Ben Rasha, you shouldn't, and a Ben Tzaddik, you shouldn't give the money for the Rasha to the Tzaddik. Why is that? Because maybe your son is a Rasha, will someday have a Tzaddik for a grandson. So therefore, you shouldn't tamper with the line of inheritance, regardless. Well, nevertheless, it says you're not supposed to, but you can. Now, Ramai said, how can you do it? You can yachil. If you can't do it, it's only Mishem Matana, as we said in our Mishnah. It's tafka, it has to be with a gift, and not through trying to manipulate the Riyusha of the Torah itself. Okay, getting back to the next portion of Mishnah. If you wrote this language of Matana in the beginning, or the middle, or the end, this sustains the entire transaction. Rabbi Yoshi says, what's an example of this? Give it to so-and-so as an inheritance to try to give it to him. That's where he wrote the Lashon Matana at the beginning of the document. That you wrote Yerusha in the beginning. They wrote Matan in the middle, Shira Shtiv at the end, so that's Lashon Matan in the middle of the document. Yerushalmi Yerusha Shenasati Lo, that's language of Matan at the end of the document. So even though you put in languages of Yerusha, would seem to detract, nevertheless, since you have language of Matana, that makes the entire transaction work as a Matna Shchibra as opposed to changing the Yerusha. Okay? Now, if a person said, a Shchimira said, Kisvu Tnu Soda Ploni, write and give over certain field to so-and-so. Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shimon Yakum, Alun Uvda Kumi Rabbi Yochanan. They asked Rabbi Yochanan the Shaila. So he said, depends. If he wrote, if the document was only written as a commemoration of the deed, meaning like a proof that it took place, then kisvutnu, you can write it and give it. Im was kosa b'ksav, however, if he meant that the document should complete the transaction, well, the document is only written after the death of the shchimra. Everybody concedes documents after death are no good. So therefore it depends on the nature of the document. The document was the tool or only proof. Tool is bad. Proof is okay. Says more further, Shmuel Shal Rav Chuna. Shmuel asked Rav Chuna, Matana shekasab avloshon mecher. What if the shchimra wrote that was a sale and that it was a gift? So Amalei said it's great. Now I'm going to learn is not like the Pnei Moshe, not the Shar Teretzro, rather like the Lieberman, who says that Rav Chuna, which is actually like the Bavli, and Rav Chuna initially said it's a good thing. Akabe Atrei Rachshe Barki, he put him on the Barak means of course lightning, right? What? What did he say? Oh, so lightning is goes very fast. So this gives two fast horses. Because as a gift, it works as a matna shchimira. But a gift has no guarantee. But a sale is guaranteed. So you gave him both milas, the mila of a gift, which works even as a matna shchimira, right? And it doesn't require full documentation and all those advantages, which we'll see later on in the Masechta. And on the other end, it has the milas of a sale, and the sale is guaranteed. So he said it's great. It's double barrel shotgun. On Rabbi Chizkiah said, Lo maran elam maisu train chivrin chsusin chivrin. There's analogous to bringing two white horses, umarkivin al treyom, and putting something on both of them. V'dein azel b'dah, v'dein azel b'dah. And each one goes in different directions. In other words, each one's pulling in different directions. Mushtakach lo tzayit klum. It comes out you didn't grab. Tzayit is hunt, but here means they didn't grab anything. In other words, mecher and matana clash and they cancel each other out. So therefore, it's not a valid gift and not a valid sale. It's nothing. So it's a machlokas whether the double language helps or actually harms. And I believe in the Bava it says it helps. I don't have a Gemara of Bava Basra with me, but I believe in the Bava it says it helps. Not here it says the conclusion is that it harms. Okay. If a person says, let so-and-so, who's a stranger, inherit me, if we're in a place where he has a daughter, or my daughter should inherit me, if he has a son, that also doesn't work. Even though these are candidates, potentially, if the first line candidate is not there, but since there is a first line candidate there, this is Masa Mashkos Batera. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Mer Ima Mara Misha Roy Liyarsha. Very interesting halacha, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says, which actually contradicts the previous Mishnah. So he says, if one said about somebody who is suitable to inherit him, and he tampered with the Yerusha to the extent that he changed the proportions, as opposed to changing, giving it from the person who is Yoresh to the person who's not Yoresh, giving it from one Yoresh to a different Yoresh, in a proportion other than the initial, than the automatic allocation would have indicated, that does work. If he said it about somebody who's not suitable to inherit it, then it does not work. Okay? Says more Rabbi Yochanan says, Lom Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Ela ben Haboni Vabas ben Habonos. Now, what does Yerusha mean? If you have several sons, you give to one son among your sons. There again, you change the proportion Torah would have given by default. Bas ben Habonos, a daughter among other daughters. But Bas ben Achim, if you give it to a daughter instead of to your boys, or ach ben abanos, you give it to one of your brothers instead of to your girls, your own brothers instead of to your girls. In other words, you go down a stature in Yerusha. You give to a girl where they're boys. You give to your brothers where you have children. Lo, that doesn't work. Even Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka concedes you can't tamper to that extent. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Allah, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, Allah is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka." Now, Rabbi showed Rabbi Nosson. Rabbi asked Rabbi Nosson a question. What did he ask him? So it should be the Gilin Ephraim says, Rabbi Bar Bachia Amar Achin Shela. This is what he asked him. My time, Rabbi Yochanan Broka. What is the Rabbi Yochanan Broka that one can't tamper by changing proportions? Rabbi Zira Amar Achin Shela. This is what Rabbi asked Rabbi Nosson. Ma Ro Lomer look Rabbi Yochanan Broka. Why do we pass him like Rabbi Yochanan Broka? So Rabbi Nosson said back to Rabbi, I don't understand. Vatlo Shanisal one, okay? Didn't you teach us this in Masechta Ksuvas? Inun Yartun? Now, this is a very interesting tush, though. I think the Bavli makes as well, but I don't remember. It's a very interesting connection. In Masechet Ksuvas, we learned that a husband can say to his wife, if you predecease me, and you don't get your ksuva, so the ksuva will go instead to your male children. That's called, anybody remember what that's called? It's a toughie. A certain type of ksuva. Ksuvas? Very good. Banim Dikrin. That's what it was. So Rabbi said, so Rabbi Nosson said to Rabbi, listen, you taught us concept of ksuvas banim Dikrin. Isn't that saying Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka? In other words, you're tampering with the Yerusha. You're giving what was the mother's ksuva instead of allocating it equally among your heirs. You're giving it to her children specifically, and not to any other wife's children. That's tampering. So you see that yourself came up with this idea. So as Zamara, the Rebbe responded and said, "No, kinimas nisin." You missed the point. That's the way to learn that Mishnah or that halacha in Ksubas is inun yatlun. It's not a redistribution of Yerusha. It's a special takanas chachamim to give it to those children, not that they should inherit it. It's a matana to those children. That was chachamim instituted to the halacha, which is openly the Rabbana of Ksubas banim Dikrin. Amar lo. So Rabbi Nosson said. Rabbi said again, further to Rabbi Nosson, or there's a Gergis in the Skoriel, the Rabbi Law said. In other words, either statement of Rabbi is Tana expounding more, or Rabbi Law explaining further. So if you look at Yarsun, even though the Ksuz Bain Dirkman is a form of Yerusha, ultimately it said the Rabbanim, and Koch based in Yupe, and based in Hefker works even by Yerusha, which is a tremendous concept. In other words, it means that even though you can't be master mashakasa batera by Yerusha, you can have based and has the right to tamper with it. So that means if the Sanhedrin nowadays, let's say, would decide that daughters, if we had a Sanhedrin would decide daughters should inherit, right? They have the right to do that. Based in Hefker, the koch of Hefker based in Hefker is such that even if master mashakasa batera doesn't work, Hefker based in Hefker does work. It's an amazing concept, right? That's what he says. Just like you said over there, Adam mizake b'loshem matana, v'acha mizake, right? I'm sorry. Now this is a case where a person cannot. Today Moshe Torah brings down the case. A guy says that a guy says. I forgot actually what this case is. A person can't give a gift b'loshen matana. What's the case we're talking about here? He says tein mana leploini. Tein mana leploini says it's not good enough. He has to be mizake that thing. It's not just enough to say tein mana leploini, but it does work by shchimera, right? Even though normally tein mana leploini is not a language of Kenyan. Here, by Shchimira, it is sufficient in order to make a Kidin, because we say Divr Shchimira Kiksum Sturin Dami. It's as if he gave it. Here too, Hacham Mizake, Kavasa. So to Enadam Mizake B'Lash Yerusha, a person normally cannot give over the language of Yerusha unless that person is a true heir. Hacham Mizake by Baksulas Bain Dirchin, Chazal allowed that to work, which is because of koich of efker based on efker. Now, Tamatina, here we come to a very interesting sugya. We're not going to finish it tonight, but Tamatina, we went over there. Just go till about 10:30, then we'll stop. Tamatina, we went over there. Fascinating halacha. If a husband promised his wife he won't inherit her, rather after his death that her property will go to her children, or to her parents, or to her brothers. He promised her that. Says Gemara, tough. He Mesa Yerushalmi. If he dies, he inherits her. Shehista Mashe Kosa B'Torah, because it's a master Mashe Kosa B'Torah issue. You can't reject Yerusha. You can't deny your position as an heir. You can give away your inheritance, but you can't repudiate your position as an heir. You are an heir, master Mashe Kosa B'Torah, to try to repudiate that position. Okay? Rabbi Yerushalmi Rav said, "Mipnei shehisna ala kosa b'Torah, v'amasta masha kosa b'Torah t'noya batel." Is that what you want to say? That like we did, like Rosh Hashanah seems to be saying that's masta masha kosa b'Torah and it's canceled? I don't understand. B'tnai she'eno shamama. That's true. Famous caveat. That's true by condition which is not a monetary condition. V'kol b'tnai maman nanu kayamin. Right here. Not to reject your Yerusha, that's a monetary tonight. And monetary tonight, we know you can't be master mashko kosa b'Torah. You can't be master mashko kosa b'Torah when it's something which doesn't concern money. When it concerns money, you could, because contractual law trumps the law, the parameters of Torah. So how can it can't be master mashko kosa b'Torah in this case over here? Now bear in mind, it's a very important point to make, which is Rav would not have asked this question by a regular Yerusha, because a regular Yerusha is not the same as Yerusha Sabal. I mentioned the point before, again, the Yerushalmi doesn't use it, so it's a little bit difficult for me to say this, but I'll say it anyway. A regular Yerushas work with mishmush. That means they're automatic. There's no transaction involved. They go automatically from father to son. In fact, the way the Chinuch puts it, the son already has a right to his father's property in his father's lifetime. That right is not strong enough to prevent his father from, say, selling it off, but it's a certain tenuous connection, right, that doesn't exist by your wife. By a wife, there's no such thing. So therefore, if there is a constant Yerusha Zabal, it's a different type of Yerusha. And we'll see more about that tomorrow night. So therefore, Lamaisa, the Gemara is asking, why can't you repudiate the Yerusha which comes from your wife, right? So says the Gemara, my time of the Rav, what's the basis of Rav's question? Basoif hu zacha, right? The question is that it's based on the assumption that at the end, my time the Rav was, the question, so why, according to Rav, can't you remove yourself, right? Why can't you remove yourself? Lamaisa, even though it's a T'nai Shebemama, what is Rav? I said the question is Rav's question. It's the Gemara's question on Rav. Rav's one that says Masa Mashkos B'Torah. So the Gemara asks the question, how was Masa Mashkos B'Torah? It's a Masa Mashkos B'Torah, Dover Shebemama. So the Gemara answers, my time of the Rav, but Seifu Zacha. Now the way the Pnei Moshe is determined is a little bit difficult, because the Pnei Moshe seems to hold that it's a Takana D'Rabbanan, and it's clear that Rav holds that it's a Yusha D'Oraisa. So rather, what Rav holds is that even Yerusha Sabal is the same thing like Yerusha of a regular heir. Just like a regular heir cannot remove himself because the Torah automatically, and it's not even automatically, the Torah made the property his without his consent or rejection of any sort. It just automatically transfers. So too by a Baal automatically transfers. So therefore, even though it looks like a Davar Shemamon, it's not really a Davar Shemamon. It's a mystical transfer of ownership, and therefore you can't reject it. Okay? We're going to get into this again, as I said, a little bit more tomorrow night. Rabbi Yochanan said, that you can adjust the portions in your inheritance. Now it should be Umar, a separate statement. Rabbi Yochanan said, if a wife sold or gave away land which was hers during her lifetime, theoretically that should be a valid transaction. Why? Because Lamaisa, even though her husband's going to inherit it, just like any inheritance of property, which you are, the person who's going to leave you bequest, possess this during his lifetime, he can sell it off. So to a wife can sell it off. So why can a wife not sell off land without her permission? Without permission of their husband? Why they say your sale is invalid? Shalote mavrachas nechosem mibayla for meres shalohin. In other words, that a woman should not try and hide property from her husband by giving it to somebody else who's going to say, I said shalom, but shalien, that's something that they belong. The other guy will say it's his. In other words, we know that wives sometimes will try and protect their assets by giving them to other men, who will then claim that the assets then belong to them, and if the wife is divorced, they'll give it back to the wife. So in order to prevent that happening, they said you should know that if this wife predeceases her husband will come and remove the property from you and take it over. So even though this is not according to the strict letter of Yerusha, this should not apply. It's not a correlative laws of Yerusha. Laws of Yerusha do not prevent the morish from selling property during his lifetime. By women, they said it does because they didn't want the women trying to hide her assets from her husband. Okay, and this was a defense mechanism to make sure that that people wouldn't buy from the woman, because they would know that after her death, if she predeceased her husband, it would go to her husband nonetheless. Okay, turn the page. Rabbi Yusni Havale Uvda Kumi Rabbana. Rabbi Yusni had a case in front of the rabbis, the Chivune, and he said, now this is a case where a man repudiated the right of inheritance in his wife's property. And he said, it's legitimate. Rabbi Yusni said, you can repudiate your right of inheritance in your wife's properties. So therefore, after his wife died, he did not allow the husband to go and take possession of the property. So the husband went and appealed to Reish Lakish. So he said, Zil chutz l'nichsach. He said, you have the right to go down to the property, because your mechila meant nothing. Like we said in Amar Av, you can't be moichel this Yerusha away. It's yours no matter what. Rabbi Yirmi, Kumi Rabbi Yossi, Kumi Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Yirmi has from Rabbi Yizera, Amar Rab l'soy v'sachben. Rab says the husband gets it after his wife's death, even if he repudiated. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan Mebroka. The husband said, look, Rabbi Yochanan Mebroka. Now I'm not sure how it follows from that he passed in that you can't remove yourself from inheritance. I don't know exactly. Maybe because he holds that it has to be a Yoresh ben Hayorshim, that you give it to somebody else who's also Yoresh, but to repudiate Yerusha altogether you can't do. Somehow that tells us that Rabbi Yochanan also says Yerusha Baal is so supreme that even if he tries to repudiate it, he can't repudiate it, he gets it nonetheless. And Reish Lakish, of course, the one just passed it. Go down to your property, because your repudiation of the inheritance of your wife's property was a meaningless gesture. So, Rabbanan, who the Rabbanan who hold that you can repudiate your wife's, your wife, the Yerusha you're going to get for your wife. So the Gemara, in a case of clear Talmudic humor, says, what do you mean, which rabbis? Rabbanan, the Rabbi Yustine. He's the guy who paskin that. Of course, he's the one who holds differently. Now, Lamaisa, what does Rabbi Yustine hold? It's likely that Rabbi Yustine holds that Yerusha Zabal is only the Rabbanan. This is actually a big issue in the Yesh Nochlin and the Bavli, and it's only alluded to here in the Yerushalmi, at least as far as I can tell. But there is an opinion which holds the Yerusha Zabal is the Rabbanan. So the Yerusha Zabal is the Rabbanan, so therefore you of course can reject it. Right? If it's the Raisa, it's hard to say that. But if it's the Rabbanan, it's pretty easy to say you can't reject it. And there are those who hold the Yerusha Zabal is the Rabbanan. In fact, it seems like the Rambam paskins that way based on various different Gemaras. Okay. Lamaisa, I told you about 10:30, we did about 2 blocks. And this is nice, fine places I need to stop. Alright? Tomorrow night we'll try the same thing, Mir Tzashem. Okay? That's true. That's an interesting point. Maybe that's what Rabbi Yusnei would hold. It's like a migo that he could divorce her, and he can also repudiate his property. his inheritance. That's a nice pshat. Then he wouldn't have to say it's based on Yerushalmi Bava Basra. Okay, guys, have a good night. Speak to you tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem. Bye bye.